Good evening. I'm Lynn Henson, Division Manager in the Community and Regional Planning Division in the Planning Department, and welcome to the first workshop in the Planning Department's mini-series on accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Tonight's presentation is on basics and benefits. And in this workshop, you'll learn what an ADU is, what are many of its benefits, and more about design and architecture considerations, and a little bit into how to build an ADU. Participants will also get an overview of Houston's regulations, how to build an ADU, and an introduction into the costs and financing. Where I am, I can't see everyone that's on the call, so if there are any council members or elected officials, I just want to pause a second to acknowledge anyone that might be in the room. And I want to acknowledge the members of the planning department that are here with us this afternoon. Again, I can't see, so I'm going to go on memory about who was in the meeting at the beginning. We have Savita Bandy. She is in the development services side and is the staff member overseeing Livable Places Action Committee, as well as Hector Rodriguez on the development services side. With me this afternoon with the Community and Regional Planning Division, we have Abraham Zaria, Tanya Sawyer, Lindsay Williams, and I can't see if anybody else from our side is on the line. If so, if you could just announce your name, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, Lynn. This is Dipti Mathur.
Hi, Dipti. Dipti is also in the development services side. So it looks like we have quite a crowd here this afternoon. I'm really excited to see everyone here. So thank you all for registering and being here in our workshop this afternoon. First off, I want to thank AARP for providing the funding for this project. AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that empowers people to choose how they live as they age. They have a wealth of resources on their website, so I urge you to visit aarp.org and take a look at what they have online. Due to the generosity of this grant, the planning department is able to bring this workshop and future workshops to you, as well as an ADU design competition, a design book, and I'll give you a little bit more information about that in a second, a how-to guide, and all of this information will be available to you on the website. We have 2 places online where you can get this information. The main ADU website will live at www.houstontx.gov/ADU. And I'm making sure to spell that out for individuals that are on the phone and can't actually see our presentation today. As well as our community engagement tool, letstalkhouston.org/ADU. This is where you can register for workshops and get all of the latest information. And both of those sites are linked together. So not only do we have the Benefits and Basics workshop today, but we also have 2 workshops planned, one for September, which is going to focus more on how to actually build an ADU. So how do you walk through the planning and permitting section, the permitting department at the City of Houston, as well as talking more in depth about financing an ADU in October. We should have dates online within the coming week for those workshops. And in January, we'll be holding a design presentation. That design presentation will highlight the design competition winner. Oh, I've mentioned the design competition a few times. So what exactly is the design competition? Well, the planning department has this design competition open now, and we're inviting architects and designers to submit designs and concepts for an ADU. These designs will be juried by you and other Houstonians. There are a few design categories, such as sustainable and resilient, garage, above the garage, for example, a detached unit that may stand alone, and affordable. The winning design will be taken through preliminary permitting review and made available online for free to homeowners to use. The hope is that this will save some time and cost for the homeowner. But I want to say this does not mean that that's the only design that a homeowner would use if they were going to build an ADU in their backyard. Anyone wanting to build an ADU on their property has the option to work with an architect or designer that they choose and choose whatever design that fits best for them, that fits best in their yard, and fits best to the purposes that they want to build an ADU for. So look for information to come. If you've registered tonight, we'll send you an email so that you can participate in the jury on the design competition. I want to mention the Livable Places Action Committee. The idea for these workshops, the design competition, the guidebook, all of this stemmed from work that Livable Places Action Committee is doing. The committee aims to create opportunities within our development standards and our development codes that encourage housing variety and housing affordability. ADUs provide a creative way to provide housing options in communities while supporting them and protecting the character of their community. Such units are usually in the rear of an existing single-family lot and often above a garage. ADUs are encouraged where they do not violate existing deed restrictions. So I want to make that very clear. In a survey that the Livable Places Action Committee conducted earlier, which ended around the 16th of this month, there were some homeowners that voiced a concern about ADUs. Communities that have deed restrictions that prohibit ADUs would not be able to allow ADUs to be built there. I welcome all of you to join in and listen to the Livable Places Action Committee meetings. They meet monthly, and at the end of each meeting is an opportunity for you to provide public comment on the work that they're doing. You can find more information about these meetings, the agenda for the meetings, the time, and how to join online at at houstontx.gov/livable-places. So I want to give you just a few highlights about ADUs in Houston. As I mentioned earlier, ADUs can be built anywhere in the city of Houston. They are allowed in our code of ordinances, but they're allowed where deed restrictions will allow them. Again, if deed restrictions restrict ADUs, then ADUs will not be allowed on those properties. Generally, ADUs can be built detached up to a maximum of 900 square feet. So you can, a comparison would be a new apartment, one bedroom, which generally runs, and I'm going for the average of about 800 square feet. The data points that you see on the screen were pulled together using Harris County Appraisal District data. This is the best data that we have in order to try to identify ADUs in Houston and find out where they are and more about them. Using this data, we found that over 3,600 single-family parcels have ADUs on them. And the median size is about 530 square feet. Now, even though this is Harris County Appraisal District data, this does not indicate whether or not someone lives in the unit, whether it's a man cave or a she shed. It just identifies the structure. And you can see by the chart that about 50% of those ADUs in Houston fall within the 400 to 600 square foot range. This image just gives you a sense of where ADUs are in the city of Houston. Some fun facts: about 11% are within a half mile of a metro rail station. 40% can be found in Council District C. That's Council District Cayman's district. 43% of these units are within 3 super neighborhoods: Greater Heights, Afton Oaks, River Oaks, and University Place. And the average size of the lot in which they sit on is approximately 11,500 square feet. Now, I mentioned Livable Places. There are a few other plans within the city of Houston that support ADUs, one being Plan Houston. Plan Houston encourages mixed income neighborhoods and enhancing access to quality, affordable housing options. Resilient Houston, which is the city's plan and strategy that links existing efforts with new ones to protect Houston against future disasters such as hurricanes, heat waves, hot, cold freezes like we had earlier this year, and chronic stresses such as aging infrastructure, poor air quality, and flooding. Resilient Houston is in support of smart growth. I've included on this slide goal 7 as well as item 24.2. And I want to quote 24.2. That states, integrate accessory dwelling units into existing neighborhoods. Now, I've talked enough, and I want to bring up our featured speaker for today's workshop, Cole Peterson. Cole is an ADU expert based in Portland, Oregon, who's helped catalyze the exponential growth of ADUs in Portland over the last decade through ADU advocacy, education, consulting, policy work, and entrepreneurship. He is the author of Backdoor Revolution, the definitive guide to ADU development. He will be giving his book to the first 10 people that register for this workshop. So give us a little bit of time to verify those that are in attendance, and we'll contact you directly over the next week about receiving the book. Cole is also the owner of Caravan, the tiny house hotel. It's the first tiny house hotel in the world, and he's also organizer of Portland's popular ADU tour. He consults with homeowners and ADUs on their property. Now, I'll remind you that he works out of Oregon, but he does consult homeowners in Oregon and teaches ADU classes for homeowners and for real estate agents in not only Oregon, but also Washington and California. He edits and manages accessorydwellings.org, buildinganadu.com, pdxadu.blogspot.com, and accessorydwellingstrategies.com. He served on the Technical and Rules Advisory Committees for Oregon's House Bill 2001 to overhaul municipal residential zoning standards to allow for middle housing throughout Oregon. He has a master's degree in environmental planning from Harvard's Graduate School of Design. And prior to his ADU work, Cole worked in the federal government for 10 years in Washington, D.C. and Portland, Oregon. With all of his experience and education, you can certainly see why he's qualified to speak on ADUs. But not only does he talk the talk, but he walks the walk. Cole developed and lived in a detached new construction ADU in 2011 and developed and lives in a daylit basement garage conversion ADU that he built in 2018. I'd like to bring Cole up to discuss the basics and benefits of ADUs, but I want to do something a little bit different. This is a virtual workshop, and it's a little bit impersonal. It's good for Cole to be able to see the faces where people have turned on their cameras. And I'm going to do something that you often don't hear in a virtual meeting. I'm going to ask everyone to turn their mic on for just a few seconds to join me in applause as we bring in Cole Stevenson.
Well, that's a first. I've never had a virtual applause. I much would prefer to be there in person, obviously, but such is the life we are living. And I've been doing virtual presentations for a year and a half or so, or however long we've been in COVID. So, you know, we're making the best of it. Thank you so much, Lynn, for that warm welcome. And I look forward to sharing some information with everybody today about ADUs. Shall I get started? Okay. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Well, before I do that, I guess while I'm just talking, yeah. So right now I'm living, in a daylit basement conversion ADU, which isn't really one of the options that we're going to discuss today. We're primarily going to be focusing on detached ADUs, which I've the most experience with because I lived in one, developed one, helped homeowners who wanted to build one to do so. I've been teaching a class for homeowners for the last decade, taught over 2,000 homeowners. And so that's my bread and butter in terms of like my mission is to help homeowners who want to build ADUs build them. Because though they are a historic legacy traditional housing form, they're pretty rare these days for a variety of reasons related to the history of development regulations and zoning. And so it's not that typical for people to have direct personal experience with them. So, this presentation is intended to give you some of the basics about what they look like, what they are, how much they cost, what are the problems with building them, what are the opportunities, why would you want to build them, how do you finance them, what are some best practices for design. So we're going to try to hit all that today. And there's a lot more we could hit. So I would encourage you to ask questions in the chat box during the presentation. I will, maybe I'll pause at certain points during the presentation to see if there's any questions, but please go ahead and just enter questions you have in the chat box. And if they're appropriate for me to answer at that point in time, I'll do so. And perhaps I'll defer to City of Houston staff to answer those questions at another presentation, but I'll try to answer questions that seem pertinent and relevant that I can answer. So as Lynn mentioned, I'm based in Portland, Oregon. 75% of what I'll be talking about or what I know is true everywhere in the country. It doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in. 25% roughly is going to be, really specific to the city of Houston. And so, so that's true with any, information in general. Like most of the information is relevant everywhere in the country. but not all of it. So there's certainly local contextual stuff that you'll need to consider and check me on as you go through the development process yourself. All right, so here you go, sharing my screen. All right, so I'm gonna go to full screen, and hopefully, Lynn, you can just confirm that you are seeing this.
Yes. Yes.
Great. Okay. All right. So this is a detached ADU. These are different versions of detached ADUs. What are ADUs? ADUs stand for accessory dwelling unit. It's a wonky kind of term that's used amongst planning staff. But it's kind of just the most generic term that jurisdictions use across the United States. So that's what we call it. But they actually have like 60 different pseudonyms, depending on where you are: backyard, cottages, in-law suites, mother-in-law units, backyard flats, granny flats, mother-in-law suites, accessory apartments, yada, yada, yada. It goes on and on and on. In any case, I'll just say ADU because that's the term that's kind of most popular in most places. These are all different versions of ADUs. In this case, we have a garage conversion ADU. In this case, we have a ADU, a detached ADU with a workshop attached to it in the front, another detached ADU back here, and then this is an ADU located above a garage. And in Houston, I think the more popular forms of ADUs are going to be, ADUs above a garage and detached ADUs. So we'll talk about those in more detail. So why are people interested in building ADUs? You might have your own personal reasons, but I almost guarantee they're going to fit into one of these two categories. So in this slide here, the quintessential ADU slide, this shows this nuclear family with one kid, one baby, living in the primary house, the yellow house, renting out the brown house in the back in 2010, 2020. They had 2.3 kids, move into the ADU and the primary house because the teenage daughter no longer wants to hang out all the time with her mom and dad because they're annoying her, and the dad needs a place to telework because he's in COVID. And they occasionally have their mom's sister comes to town to hang out, to escape from her family. So she lives in the ADU at times. And then in 2040, they become empty nesters. Kids go off to school. They're like, we don't need so much space. We don't need this 2,500 square foot house anymore. Let's move to the ADU. We'll start renting out the primary house. And so is the life cycle of an ADU. And this is kind of the quintessential ADU life cycle. And that is what we found in some actual statistically based surveys of ADU owners is that the primary motivations for people to build ADUs are, number one, passive rental income potential, and number two, multi-generational household flexibility. So you're probably interested in building an ADU for one of those two reasons, because 95% of us are. There might be some other occasional reasons that people might want to have an ADU, but it's usually going to be a combination of those two things. As people are like, yeah, I want to use it for rental income, but I might want to move into it someday because I might want to relocate and have a place where I can still live because I like my neighborhood. Oh, and my primary house isn't accessible, and I want to have a place that's accessible when I'm older. So I want to build an ADU that's got a ground level entry without any stairs and have a bathroom on the lower level. And so that, they're thinking about, the fact that they might want to live there. Maybe I want to give this property to my kid one day and, have my kid, when they have kids, I'll be around to be the grandparents. And so all those are different versions of this little quintessential slide. Now, a couple of the other things about this slide that were perhaps accidental but interesting to me is that this ADU, this family is living on this property from 2010 to 2040. Now, we don't actually know whether people who have properties, in fact, will live in them for 30 years. But what we do know is that, unfortunately, for those of you who are building ADUs or are thinking about it, ADUs are probably not going to add as much value as it takes to construct them. So the primary motivation for building an ADU may be financial in nature, but it shouldn't be for resale value. That is, if you build a, say, $200,000 ADU, it's not going to add $200,000 of value, most likely. It's going to add less than that. And I can't give you an exact number, but it's certainly not going to be $200,000. And so you might say, well, that's not a very good reason to build an ADU. But in fact, that when you're thinking about whether an ADU makes sense, it doesn't make sense from a resale point of view, but it makes a heck of a lot of sense financially if you're holding on to the property and renting out one unit or the other, because over time, eventually that ADU will pay for itself through rental income. And so the, most probably the easiest number to think about is maybe like a 8 to 10 year payback period for development of an ADU. That is, if you held onto the property for 8 to 10 years, the ADU would effectively pay for itself in terms of the rental income. That number, you'll have to do some calculations to see whether that number is true in your particular circumstance. But, that's a rule of thumb that might work in a lot of parts of the country based on, how much construction costs and how much rental income you can get from that housing unit. And then if you add in the contributory value of that ADU, that is this $200,000 ADU that you add isn't going to add $200,000, but maybe it'll add $100,000 of value. Well, all of a sudden, you really only need to make $100,000 of rental income before that ADU starts to become a rational investment. So somebody else is sharing their screen, so I'm going to reshare my screen. Here we go. All right, so that's one data point, and the other thing that I'll note here is that that ADU that's been added to the property, this family is living on that property for 30 years now. Again, we don't know if that's true, but like I was mentioning before, it's very likely that people are building an ADU in part so that they can live on their property for a longer period of time. One of the interesting things about ADUs is that they not only change use over the course of decades, but they change use over the course of a single year. You could very well imagine a situation in which the sister-in-law is coming to town for 3 months, and then the dad is going to use it for an office, and then teenage daughter needs to use it for her friends, and some family friend who needs a place to live for a little while, and then it's used for a short-term rental. I mean, there's a whole bunch of scenarios that could happen, and in the age of COVID, it's even more so true that you're going to see all these different interesting use cases that were not previously so prominent as they are now. For example, homeschooling, all of a sudden you might want to have a dedicated private quiet space for a few people to get together to do some home learning or whatever. So you can imagine circumstances like that where ADUs are playing a more prominent role. People are generally investing more money in property improvements on their own residential properties these days because of COVID. So there's been a lot of speculation that ADUs will, perhaps see a spike in interest because of COVID. And I think that might be true. But the bigger trends here are what I'm going to focus in on, which is over the last 75, 76 years in this slide, household sizes have shrunk. Okay, so they've gone from roughly 3.6 to roughly 2.6. And the reason for this is a variety of factors that are occurring. Number one, we're having fewer kids. Fewer of us are having kids. Number two, those of us who are having kids later in life. So the proportion of our life that we are living in the house with kids is shorter because we're living longer and we're having kids later. So even if you live to be 80 years old and you have a kid in your house for 20 years, that's only 1/4 of your life. So for the 3/4 of your life, you're maybe not living in a nuclear family household, you're living in a 1 or 2 person household. So these are, and of course, there's also more divorces, more separations. And so all these factors are kind of coalescing to create this demographic household shift across the United States, including Houston, towards 1 and 2 person households. And in Portland, just as an example, 2/3 of all households are 1 and 2 person households. So yeah. Meanwhile, we have this diametrically polarized mismatch between the actual production of housing units that's occurred in that same time span, where the average home size in 1950 was 900 square feet, and it shot up to 2,600 square feet for new construction as of 2013. Put these two data points together, and you're seeing this dramatic per capita square foot increase. Now, that might sound like a good thing to some people, but there's some downside to that, which I'll be covering on the next slide here. So it went from 292 square feet per capita to 1,023 square feet per capita. And the major downside, if you're a believer in climate change, which I happen to be, because I'm in Portland where it's just 116 degrees in July, which has never happened before. So in any case, This average size house in Oregon, 2,274 square feet, it uses this much energy, 90 million British thermal units of energy in the course of a year. And if that home is built to high performance standards, that is, high, like really good insulation, really good air sealing, it will use less energy. And that's a great thing. And simply by improving the thermal shell, improving the air tightness and weatherization of the unit, you can reduce the amount of BTUs that are used primarily for heating and cooling. In Houston, it's going to be primarily for cooling. So this time of year, a lot of AC going on. Now, the interesting thing, though, is if you simply reduce the size of the structure to a standard ADU size, say 768 square feet, that ADU just built to code is going to use less energy than a high performance average size house. So I don't care whether you believe in climate change or not, but if you're building a small housing unit, you're building a high performance housing unit. That is a unit that's not going to use nearly as much energy as a average size house. And so, and if you build that ADU to high performance standards, it'll use less energy still. So just by building an ADU, you're building a high performance green building in some cases. Now, one important caveat to think about here, sorry I'm getting into the details, but the details are important, is that if you had 5 people living in this 2,200 square foot house, they would use less energy per capita than one person living in the ADU. But the reality is we don't have many of these 5-person households anymore. That was a thing in the 1950s, but not so much a thing of the 2010s or 2020s. So organizations like AARP have really come around to seeing the benefits that ADUs provide, and they're doing a great job at promoting ADUs. They helped fund this workshop, and I'm doing consulting with them across the country. They like them because they're affordable housing options. They like them because they provide housing for people of all ages. I mentioned before, if you had a house that had steps going up to it like this one, but you had an ADU in the back that was ground level, you could have an accessible unit on your property, so you could basically live in place. They're the right size for the kinds of households that we have. They're good for the environment, as I just mentioned. And they're compatible with the community. They don't really disrupt the neighborhood character because they're so small, you don't even know they're there. And that's one of the things that's kind of beautiful about them. They're kind of seen as discrete density. That is, they don't really have big visual impact on the neighborhood, even though they provide additional housing, which is important in all these places in the country where we're having an affordable housing crisis. So speaking of an affordable housing crisis, let's talk about costs. So unfortunately, I've given you all the good news about why ADUs are playing such an important role in our country right now and in communities, and why you yourself might be interested in building it. But even if you have all the motivation in the world to do so, you might be stymied by the fact that they're really expensive to build. Unfortunately, they are. This is a house. This is not like buying an expensive car. It's much more expensive than buying an expensive car, maybe like buying a Lamborghini. So it's like that expensive. It's, this is not a $50,000 endeavor. It's going to be at least $100,000, more likely a lot more than that. And so I'm going to give you some cost thresholds to think about and some ways to think about how much this might cost. But, understand that the nature of costs has dramatically changed in the last year alone. Number one. Number two, it's geographic in nature. So the costs in Portland aren't the same as the costs in Houston. So the numbers I'll give you, take them with a grain of salt. But some of the principles I'll talk about here are going to be relevant anywhere in the country. So number one, in Portland, the maximum size ADU is 800 square feet. So guess what? Most people are building really large ADUs, 700 to 800 square feet. Same thing will be true in Houston. It's the most rational thing to do, to build as big as you can. Why is that? It's because extra square footage is the least expensive thing you can add on to a housing unit. It's really expensive to to build a 1 square foot ADU is going to cost you a lot of money. It's because you still have to add this kitchen. The kitchen is going to cost $20,000. You still have to add a bathroom. The bathroom is going to cost you $10,000. You still have to upgrade your electrical service. That's going to cost you $4,000. So there's going to be all these fixed costs to development, no matter how big the ADU is. But once you've put in all those fixed costs going through the permitting process, and other elements of the development process, additional square footage is not that expensive. So basically what this is telling you as an economic matter, you're getting more for your money the bigger you build, but you can only build it up to a certain threshold of 900 square feet. So a lot of people will tend to build between like 700 to 900 square feet because you can fit like a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom pretty easily in that size of an ADU. You can get pretty good rental income and have it be a pretty comfortable space for at least 2, if not 3 people. So some of the costs that I give for the total cost of construction, when I'm talking about total cost, I'm not just talking about the construction cost itself, but also the design costs, the permit fees, the utility connection upgrades. All those things obviously do cost money. And then above and beyond that, there's also landscaping, which is not incorporated here. So you'll be, utterly destroying your backyard in the course of building an ADU, so you're gonna have to re-landscape things. In any case, the total design build cost for building an ADU can be $175 per square foot to $400 a square foot. That's a big range. I don't really like to use the cost per square foot metric in general. I like to think about just the total fixed cost of development. So when I think about like an 800 square foot ADU, same general price point as a 900 square foot ADU, it might cost something like $210,000 as of 2 years ago in Portland. But these days in Portland, it's costing more like $300,000 because the costs have gone so far up in the last year because of supply chain breakdowns, because of labor shortages. So it's really hard to pin down exact average costs in any market right now because there's so much variability in materials and labor shortages. But I would have been able to have said a year ago, based on the ADU tour, statistical data points of talking to ADU owners and how much they spent, it would have cost $210,000 as of a year and a half ago. So smaller detached structures, like I mentioned before, are actually going to cost more per square foot, but they'll cost less overall. So this one might cost an average of $350 a square foot instead of $250 a square foot. It used to be like $160,000. These days, it's going to be more like $250,000 for a 400 square foot ADU. So that's really expensive for everybody. Very few people have that much money available to them. So I'm going to go over some of the more common ways that people are dealing with these tremendous capital costs that you have to somehow deal with when you're building an ADU. This is the #1 barrier to ADU development. When you're building an ADU, you gotta, not only be in a place that allows them and have the ambition to do so, because it's going to take a lot of work, but you're gonna have to have a lot of money to do so. And not everybody, the people who want to build ADUs tend not to be super loaded. They tend to be kind of middle income people. So with homes, but that might be the biggest kind of source of asset wealth that you have. So here is what people do. It's oftentimes like a patchwork of the following 5 different mechanisms. #1, liquid assets. So you have some degree of savings in your bank, maybe $2,000, maybe $20,000, maybe $100,000, I don't know. Then you have some stocks you can liquidate potentially. Maybe you have a 401k. 401k is an investment, a retirement account that you have with a private employer, but you can actually draw up to $50,000 of a HELOC, of a 401k, to use towards the development of an ADU on your property. So that's a good loan to know about. Most financial advisors would say, never touch your 401k. I would say, absolutely touch your 401k, because it is the best loan option that you can get. That is, you will pay a interest rate against the loan that you borrow, but that interest rate goes to you. It doesn't go to a bank. It goes back to you. So consider a 401k loan if you can do it. If you have like $100,000 or more in your 401k, you can borrow up to $50,000 of that for an ADU. Consider it anyway. All right, so that's one bucket of financing options. The second bucket, probably the most common way that most people are funding the majority of their ADU, are through cash out refinancing or a home equity line of credit. And I put those on the same line because they're kind of two sides of the same coin. This is only a relevant solution for those who have equity built up in their property. That is, they bought their property at certain value, say $500,000, and it's gone up to $700,000 or whatever. If it's increased by a certain amount, $200,000, you can dip into that appreciated equity and borrow against it. And you can do that in two ways. One is to refinance the first mortgage. So let's say you have a loan for $400,000 on your mortgage, and the interest rates are like 5%. And you look at the interest rates today, and they're like 2.75, 3%. You could refinance that loan and not only get a better loan term for that $300,000 or $450,000 loan, but you could actually increase the loan size to the current value of the home. So if the home is now worth, say, $650,000, you could borrow up to 95% of that current loan value. So not $650,000, but like $625,000 or something. So you could refinance, pay off that first mortgage, and then lock into a lower rate and pay against that new larger mortgage. But you get all that money as a cash out advanced loan, essentially, that you're paying 3% interest on. So that's a cash out refinance. That's something to consider if you don't have a great current first mortgage and you would qualify to do a refinance. Consider doing a cash out refinance. The second option is better if you have really good first mortgage terms, like if you have a 3% interest loan or less. You probably don't want to touch it. It's probably not something, it'll probably never get that low again. So don't touch it, leave it alone. But if you have some additional equity built into the property, you can borrow against that equity and borrow that as a second position loan. And that's referred to as a HELOC or home equity line of credit. So if your home's worth, say, $700,000 and you have a $300,000 loan, you can borrow the difference between those two, or at least a percentage of that difference. Those terms tend to be not quite as good as a first mortgage. They might be like 4 or 5% interest loans. But the good news about a HELOC is you don't get charged for setting up a HELOC. So you can just literally let it sit there as basically a line of credit, like a credit card. But as long as you don't use that credit card, you're not going to be charged anything. And guess what? If you use this particular home equity line of credit card, it's actually just a checkbook. The interest rates are like 5% versus a credit card, which is like 18% or whatever. So it's much better interest rates than other forms of loans that you can get. Okay, next is sweat equity. So as a general matter, the numbers that I gave you as far as construction costs, say it's $200,000 to build an ADU or $300,000 to build an ADU. Half of that cost is for construction, for the material, half is for labor. So a lot of homeowners find that they want to be involved in the development process to some extent, usually not for the construction of the weather-tight shell, but rather for the finish work. That is like the painting and the putting in the trim and maybe installing the cabinets, doing the tile work. That stuff, you could save quite a bit of money if you do that work yourself. So you can, the average in Portland is like $10,000 of sweat equity people put in. So a lot of people do that. If you were to theoretically do all the work yourself, which is not advisable for most homeowners, you could theoretically reduce your construction costs by half because you'd just be paying for material. Of course, you'd be out of your day job during that time and you'd be working your butt off for a long time to get this thing built. So that presumes that you know what you're doing, you have all the tools, and you're not otherwise gainfully employed. So that's why it's not really a good option for most people. Okay, next option, family loans and other non-secured lines of credit. So family loans are like a loan on a handshake for mom, dad, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, friend. Those can be as informal or as formal as you want. You can use a lawyer to write something up, or you can just do it on a handshake. That's not that uncommon for ADU development, some degree of that kind of family loan coming into play. And other non-secured lines of credit are things like personal loans from banks or credit unions that are interested in lending you money if you have money. Like if you have cash in the bank, they'll lend you money. And credit cards are other non-secured lines of credit. When I say non-secured, it's not secured against your primary residence. Like it's not a home equity line of credit. It's just a personal line of credit based on your credit worthiness. Then lastly, and perhaps least commonly, is conventional renovation loan financing. This is where a bank would would give you a loan based on the future value of the property once the ADU is complete. This is a far more complicated form of financing. I wouldn't recommend it for most people, but it's a good option if you don't have any of these other options to play with. If none of these other options are going to work for you, consider renovation loan financing. I wouldn't advise it because it is a bureaucratic headache to get renovation loan financing. You thought getting a first mortgage was hard or refinance was hard, try renovation loan financing. They're going to get into your business. They're going to want to know everything about how much you make and how much you owe and what this house is going to be worth after the ADU is done. It's going to be hard for them to find comps because sales comps for ADUs are notoriously difficult to identify. So anyway, it's going to be a headache. But all that said, if these other options are not available to you, definitely know that there is a pathway using renovation loan financing. There are national banks that do it, such as Guaranteed Rate, such as Eagle Home Mortgage. So those are two companies that I know that do it anywhere in the country. I mentioned that you could potentially borrow a credit card. I'll mention that project loan credit cards from Home Depot are a good option for some people. You can buy goods and services from Home Depot for pretty low interest rates, or it's like interest only for the first 6 months or 12 months, and then after that, it goes into the credit card, conventional credit card interest rate. So this is like a good way to get over the finish line of building an ADU and then potentially doing a cash out refinance, pull out cash from the property, and then pay off your credit card debt before you get triggered into having to pay these high interest rates from credit card companies. Not an advisable strategy, honestly, but as a last ditch resort, it's good to know that it's there. And this is an example of a personal line of credit that a bank might offer. Okay, so as I mentioned, it's a patchwork of these funding different mechanisms that homeowners are using. So we have, people are using cash, HELOCs, renovation loans, personal loans, cash out refinance, rehab loans. All those are things that people are using. All right, so I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions that have come up in the first portion of my presentation.
There's a conversation. I may know questions.
Lynn, sorry.
Alice Young asked about.
Lynn, sorry.
I'm hearing an echo. Can you hear that as well?
Yes, we are hearing an echo and can't hear you clearly. Sorry about that.
Savita, can you monitor the chat and call out questions?
Sure. Now your voice is very clear.
Lynn, it's okay. I muted some people, so continue.
Thank you.
Your voice is clear. Thank you. Thank you.
Alice Young asked, is separate electrical and water metered allowed?
Yeah, so as far as utilities go, we'll just go through all 4 utilities right now. There's water, sewer, electric, and gas, right? And so generally speaking, and I'm not going to give the authoritative answer on behalf of the city of Houston. They will do that next week in next week's presentation. But here's how it works out in general. In general, the ADU is treated as a separate unit and is entitled to have its own separate dedicated electrical meter if you wish, but you don't necessarily have to put in a separate dedicated electrical meter. That will be based on whatever the city's policy is, but I'm guessing they would allow for a separate dedicated meter. It's up to you whether you want to put in the second meter, though. You might have to, at least not in Portland. But that could be case by case. It's only marginally more expensive to put in a secondary meter. If you do put in a secondary meter, you will have to have a secondary bill, which will have an administrative fee associated with it. So just recognize that when you enter into getting a second meter, you're not only paying a little bit more upfront, but you're also going to pay an indefinite monthly administrative fee to have that second service. Of course, the renter of that second unit would be the person who's actually paying for that bill. So that's what it's electric. The second principle of electric is that the occupant of unit A should never have to go into unit B in order to turn off or on their utilities. So in the case of electrical use, you wouldn't be able to house the sole electrical panel in unit A inside of Unit A, because Unit B occupant would have to go inside Unit A in order to turn their power back off if it went on, or on if it went off. And so the presumption is if the occupant of Unit A is on vacation in Mexico for 6 months, Unit B must be able to be self-sufficient without the existence of or the interaction with Unit A occupants. Okay, so that's kind of how that works with electrical. With sewer, generally speaking, you can just tap into the sewer on your own private property, and that you'll have a single lateral that goes out to the street. For water, same deal. You have a single lateral that comes out from the street. And one factor that you'll have to bear in mind is that you might have to upsize your water meter based on the fixture count that you have on your property. And you'll have to go through that process to determine how much upsizing you'll have to go through. You might have to upsize your meter from a 5/8 inch meter to a 3/4 inch meter or 1 inch meter. That's going to be a City of Houston question. And that can cost quite a bit of money. So, footnote that. And then gas, if you choose to add gas, just like electric, you can have a separate dedicated gas meter, but you don't have to have gas. In fact, I would encourage people to consider not adding gas to their property in general as an environmental matter. So I'll pause there.
Lynn, again, someone has multiple speakers on. There is an echo.
Am I okay to speak?
Lynn,
Sure.
we have somebody from Public Works who raised their hand. Hoy Lennett. How Lennett?
My question to you, I joined the meeting just a few minutes late. Is it only available in the City of Houston city limits? Do you know if any other cities within Houston, suburban areas like Missouri City, Stafford, offers this type of opportunities? Because even though you are actually paying city water and sewer, you may be considered within Missouri City limits. That's my question.
Right now, today, the discussion is about Houston. So what is allowed in Houston? The other cities may have other regulations that we are not aware of. So the focus today is for City of Houston's regulations.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to, Alice Young had another question, which we will be able to address in our next workshop at the end of September. But I want to just acknowledge this question. Will a detached ADU trigger a third parking space requirement? We'll be able to go a little bit more in depth at the next workshop, because that isn't quite such a straightforward answer just to say yes or no. It will really depend on your property and how your property is laid out and designed. So we'll be able to address that at our next workshop. I also saw a question from Curtis Davis, who asked, wouldn't an ADU add the present value of the potential rental income? That's added value to the property. Cole, can you speak a little bit about the return on investment, or how someone might look at the return on their investment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question depending on, it's not the same as like investing in a stock in terms of measuring the return on investment. Like I said before, one way to think about it is like you take the rental income, and let's say you just to make the math easy, let's say, well, let me see if I have a slide on this. I don't think I do, but I might. No, I don't. Okay, so if you're making, say, $1,500 a month, or let's say $1,200 a month, to make it simple, that's $14,400 a year of rental income. If your ADU costs, say, $144,000, that would mean that your ADU would take 10 years for it to pay for itself. But as I mentioned before, if you add $144,000 ADU, you might be adding $70,000 of contributory value to your property. So instead of it actually taking 10 years for it to pay for itself, all you have to do is make up half that, $77,000 of rental income, before, if you sold the property, you wouldn't be at a loss, right? So instead of it taking 10 years for it to break even, quote unquote, it would only take 5 years. So that's, so the way I'll differentiate the return on investment for an ADU versus, say, investing in a stock is, A, you're investing in a real asset that's like tangible. B, it's kind of a conservative investment in the sense that, unlike a stock, there's pretty little risk. That is, there's always going to be a strong rental market. And C, it's giving you lifestyle flexibility. So above and beyond the financial benefits, you're getting all these ancillary benefits that can significantly improve your quality of life, and you're creating income. So it's not just a passive investment that is growing that you can dip into when you're 80, but it's giving you cash dividends each month. So it's a little bit different from that vantage as well. So it's not easy to just compare it as like an ROI relative to other investments, but those are some of the considerations.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask one more question. Feedback. Kathy Ingham asked, is there one winner in each category or one overall in reference to the design competition? There will be one winning design, but there will be winning mentions for the different categories. It will depend on what type of submissions we get, but we plan on highlighting our goal and hope is to highlight one honorable mention in each of the categories and one overall winner. I encourage people to continue typing their questions in the chat and turn it back over to Cole.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. Oh, I guess I'm already sharing. All right, so can you confirm, are you seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, all right, so we're going to get into the regs here. As Lynn mentioned, they're going to cover the regs in more detail next week, but here's some just cursory information, okay? And don't ask me to get into the details because I'm not your expert on this one. But in general, you're going to need to have 2 off-street parking spots for your primary house, and then you'll need to have a 3rd off-street parking spot provided once you build an ADU. And one of those 2 spots can be a tandem spot, that is one spot in front of another. Each spot for a parking vehicle is like 8.5 by 19 feet long. The maximum size of the ADU is 900 square feet, and that could be 3 feet from the side setback, and depending on the property, it could be 5 or 10 feet from the rear setback. There's probably going to be a fire code separation requirement between the primary house and the ADU of 6 feet, but don't hold me to that. But that's generally speaking how fire standards work. One of the important provisions that you have to be mindful of in Houston is to make sure that your property is unrestricted. There's no deed or title restrictions that exist on the property that would prevent you from building an accessory dwelling unit explicitly, and I'll show you an example of one of those on the next slide. And then in other jurisdictions, all different structural forms of ADUs are allowed, such as internal ADUs, like internal carve-outs, or attached bump-out ADUs. In Houston's case, they allow those types of structural improvements, but you wouldn't call that an ADU. They would call that a duplex. So don't be put off by the nomenclature, but just know that if you're going to do an attached addition to your property or an attached internal carve-out, it's not going to be classified as an ADU. So the benefit of that is that you could be greater than 900 square feet.
This is Abraham, President of Houston. You're still showing the funding ADU slide.
Oh,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
thank you.
Sure.
I'm gonna stop sharing and then reshare. All right. So thank you, Abraham. So this was the slide that I was showing here. This was, just as a general matter, these are the pros and cons of the duplex versus ADU. If it's a duplex, it can be larger than 900 square feet. If it's a duplex, you're going to have to add 2 additional parking spots for that new standalone housing unit that's not classified as just an accessory to the primary dwelling unit. Generally speaking, duplexes are going to be built synchronously, whereas ADUs will be built asynchronously. That is, an ADU would be built after the development of the primary unit, whereas generally speaking, duplexes are going to be built at the same time as one another, but that's not always the case. So those are some general pieces of regulatory information for you to consider. Build up your questions and throw them at the city staff next week, because they're going to be your subject matter experts for that. This is an example of a deed restriction that shows a restrictive covenant prohibiting detached ADUs in line item 8. Every deed restriction might be different, but in here it says no resident shall be permitted to, or no trailers or temporary buildings may be erected on any of the said lots at any time and be used as a residence temporarily or permanently. So you might have some deed restriction like that. You also cannot have any goats, cows, sheep, or swine, in this particular property. All right, so here are some examples of detached ADUs, just so you can get some ideas of what they might look like. This is a 2-story ADU. Here's a 1-story ADU, another 2-story ADU. This could be like an ADU above a garage type of thing. Backyard ADU right here, very lovely. Some design ideas for detached ADUs that are worth considering. I'm going to just breeze through these because these are relevant for all kind of detached ADUs. So consider having a great room that is a kitchen, living, and dining room all collectively in one portion of the downstairs level. Consider having tall ceilings, long sight lines, elevated windows to cast nice light across small spaces. French doors that lead into the yard, tactile use of lighting. So I'm just going to show some examples of this. This is a really great little general floor plan trick to consider for 2-story ADUs. You have a great room below, and then note this dotted line here. This is where this area of the lower floor plan is vaulted. This is covered in flooring. So this would be the bedroom up above, and this is all vaulted. And what the effect of that is visually is quite stunning. You get this, kind of cavernous, nice downstairs space that's covered with the ceiling, and then you get out into the main space, and it's just like you get these grandiose ceilings. So even though it's a small 800 square foot building, it feels much bigger than any other house around. So here's some more examples of vaulted or lofted bedrooms on one half of the ADU, so you can get a sense of what that looks like. Okay, window placement for space, light, and privacy. So consider where you're placing windows for both getting light into the house, but also for privacy between the primary house and the ADU, and also adjacent neighbors. Being mindful and tactful of where those windows are going to be located architecturally so that you're not creating privacy conflicts. That's not like a regulatory must, but rather this is a best practice when you're designing a space, just to be mindful of that. So those tall windows letting in light from the, whether it's like a skylight or, just a nice view out the window. You really want to try to extend the interior to the outdoors using large windows and French doors. So like this is an example of a French door leading out to a garden. This is a very good, idea to do something like this on the lower level of the ADU from the great room leading out to the backyard. This is a sliding glass door, same idea. Large windows can do the same thing. Here's an accordion door, much more expensive. This is like a $10,000 type of solution for this kind of thing versus a sliding glass door, which is like $1,000 or $1,500. So there's a big price swing for that. More French doors. Yes, these are all small houses. So like in general, what you're trying to do is make it feel bigger than it really is. So on that note, because it's small, think about storage. Overemphasize storage in your design. You won't regret it. So here, there's a whole bunch of built-in storage with tactfully located clear story windows above that, which give you a sense of volume of space, but don't intrude upon the privacy of adjacent neighbors because they're not at eye level, right? So that's like a nice design trick here. More storage. Here we have another privacy window that's chopping off differentiating the bedroom. Are you not seeing my screen?
That is.
All right.
And sure what I hear my voice, but I can see yours.
Oh, that's good. Okay, I'm glad to hear that because I thought I was doing everything correctly. All right, so Lynn, can you confirm, are you seeing a picture with clear story windows above storage right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to assume that I am correctly sharing my screen and that there might be some internet connection issues, perhaps on somebody's computer, but I don't think there's anything else I can do. All right, so this is a wood sliding door that's kind of separating the bedroom from the lower level. So when they all want to open it up and have this sense of volume, so they can see down to the lower level and they can see up to the bedroom. And then they have a skylight that feeds light both into the lower space below as well as into the bedroom. That's a great little trick to create a lot of different spaces with just a sliding wood door. In this case, there's also a ground level bathroom. There's exposed wood beams in the kitchen. This is a nice trick to make a space feel taller, which so normally you'd have like drywall on the ceiling, but in this case, rather than putting drywall beneath those beams, they just leave the wood beams exposed. That gives them an extra foot of headroom in the kitchen. So it looks both taller and more visually interesting. Tactile placement of windows. Again, we have windows here that are not quite at eye level, so you're not like directly looking into the primary house. And here's another example of a detached ADU and some of the principles of what we're seeing here: a nice covered entryway, exterior storage, south-facing windows, utilizing the outdoor space as an extension of the living space. I'm a big fan of covered entryways, but that's in part because of my bias, because there's more rain to deal with up here. But covered spaces in general outdoors are really nice because they provide both shade and cooling and protection from rain. So because it doesn't count as square footage against your ADU entitlements of 900 square feet, you can definitely use outdoor covered space as a way to enhance your living area without it counting against you. And it's a lot less expensive, obviously, than making conditioned habitable living space. All right, so if you are interested in getting more information from me about ADU development, I do have some free guides that you can download if you subscribe to get them from my website. Just go to buildinganadu.com. This is a step-by-step guide to ADU design and permitting. There's a design principles packet and a presentation about ADU design principles. And then this is like some sample pictures, plans, and building budgets. So, I'm not a designer or builder, but I just, my bread and butter is kind of information for homeowners. So I have a book and other stuff. So this is the book. Some of you will get this book, but if you're interested in, a really extensive, exhaustive overview of the development process, this is 375 pages, half of which is about building an ADU for homeowners, half of which is for policymakers who want to see more ADUs built. This is a really good authoritative book on that topic. And here's my contact information here. As Lynn mentioned, I run two websites that I'll refer you to. One is buildinganadu.com. The other one is called accessorydwellings.org. This is like kind of a group blog that has a lot of information and posts from a number of different authors, not just me. So check it out. It's got a lot of good information. And I will wrap it up there.
Thank you. Sorry about the echo. Is that better? Oh, that's better. I want to I see a few other questions, some of which we may have to address more in detail at the next workshop. Someone, I'm not sure what their name is, says, also think about the space for trash and recycling cart collection. Is there enough space for that? And I think that that can be addressed in the design and overall layout of the entire property. And again, each residential lot is going to be different depending on the size of the lot, the size of the main structure, the size of your parking and what you have available to work with. But I'm writing these questions down so that we can address some of them in our next workshop. Also, Daniel Cano asked, how is site drainage worked around ADUs? Are there strategies to slope towards the street?
Lynn, that is something very specific. We will have to talk to Public Works to make sure we provide the right information. So let's put that on the next workshop, answering that specific question.
And if there are any other questions, please raise your hand.
Cole, you're muted, sorry.
I did see one question about tax impacts, and I think it's worth trying. I'm not going to pretend to be a subject matter expert on this, but if somebody is, go ahead and type in what you believe the answer to be. Generally speaking, what happens is they're going to look at the value of the property after the improvement is done and increase the taxes according to the new valuation of the property. So there is going to be some real estate property tax impacts from building an ADU. I don't think I'm capable of kind of giving you a number of what that impact would be in the Houston market. I can say in the Portland market, it would increase your taxes based on, like, if you're building like an 800 square foot ADU, it would increase your taxes by like $2,500 a year, which is roughly equivalent to 1 month's rental income. So that's kind of the rule of thumb that I would give in the Portland market, is like, expect that your tax will go up by roughly 1 month's rental income from what you could generate from the ADU itself. That is to say, don't be too freaked out by the tax impacts. It's not going to be like, it's not going to kill the pro forma of the project, but it's not insignificant either. If anybody else has a better answers to provide based on their own personal experience in Houston, please go ahead and put it in the chat.
Thank you. Curtis, did I see you have a question? Curtis? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you initially. The question was answered. The economics of it clearly varies with one's income. And to the extent that an ADU is part of a community land trust, or there are other kinds of subsidies that the city can put forward to make it more affordable for middle income folks, seems to be the key issue as it relates to affordability. But from a market point of view, it just seems out of the reach for anyone whose net household income is $100,000 or less here in the Houston market.
I think, in general, that might be true. This doesn't really serve the low income bracket, and it doesn't really serve the high income bracket either. It really serves the middle income bracket. That's the sweet spot for ADUs. That said, there are renovation loan financing options, and those renovation loan financing options are going to look at, among other things, your credit score, your debt to income ratio, but also the after rehab value of the property. So if you have decent, if you can qualify for a mortgage that's bigger than the one that you currently have, And if your credit score is such that they, trust that you'll actually make the payments, you can get a loan for greater than what you currently have in equity on the property. But like I said, it's a pain in the butt to use that particular form of financing. So it's not something I can strongly advise, but it is an option.
I also see from Jonathan Pope. It states, the city requires new construction to be 12 inches minimum above the nearest manhole. How do ADU comply with this? Again, we are adding that to our list so that we can provide more information and provide guidance at our next workshop. Are there any other questions that haven't been answered or addressed?
I had wanted to ask a question or make a comment. This is Gracie Science, and I've been listening. And one of the things that I agree with the last speaker about, it really is for certain income brackets to be able to do something like this. But there should be a discussion at the city where grants are being made for investments in communities. And there should be a discussion about whether some of the grants could be accessed by certain homeowners that can provide these accessory dwelling units in light of the fact that the city is in great need of housing, and in light of the fact that it's many times helps to control the gentrification that is taking place in many of these communities. So maybe that is a discussion that could be held in the future with the city leaders.
Thank you, Gracie. I appreciate that. We've talked a little bit about that possibility. I've had some initial conversations with housing. There are some funding sources which would not consider ADUs as an acceptable housing construction. So we do need to have more conversations centered around that and how to reach more income levels in order to support various income levels being able to build ADUs. I see another question in the chat. Sophonius asks, doesn't requiring additional parking go contrary to one of selling points to ADUs?
You could say that, but that's the regulations today, and that's the reason through Livable Places, out of which this ADU project has branched out, we are looking at the requirements for these additional, accessory dwelling units, or referred to as secondary dwelling units in Houston. So thank you for the comment. We are talking about, do we really need that additional parking space if that main unit has the required parking? We are still discussing. I encourage you to participate in the Livable Places project and give your feedback to us. And thank you. Point noted.
And there's another question in the chat from Kyle Byrne. Aside from the minimum size requirements dictated by Houston IRC for individual habitable rooms, is there a minimum size required for ADU's total area?
Oh, again, we can address this coming up in next workshop. There is a maximum size of 900 square feet. There is no minimum size, but based upon certain code requirements, I think the lowest you can go is close to 300 square feet, but we will get you a definite answer in the next meeting.
These are all great questions. Thank you. Teresa, sorry, I hear feedback. What is stop one from what?
Lynn, I see one other question. Can I go?
Yes, please.
It missed, but can we already request, is city permitting already prepared to receive requests from homeowners on ADU? It's from Isher Garcia. Yes, ADU is already allowed in Houston unless your deed restrictions prohibit it. You can build an ADU if you have a single family lot and you have the one unit. You can add the 900 square feet detached unit in the back, and you can start the process today if your lot is larger than 3,500 square feet. Any other questions?
Okay, I encourage everyone, if I see one more question real quick, Matthew can.
Is there, yes, go ahead, sorry, Lynn.
Go ahead, Savita.
Is there a process to get a deed restriction variance to allow an ADU in a deed restricted area? Deed restrictions are separately filed restrictions, and there is no variance process. It is not, they are not ordinance requirements, and therefore there is no variance.
Savita, may I add, this is Dipti Mathur.
Sure, please go ahead, Dipti.
On the deed restriction question, if the neighborhood, there are amendments to the deed restrictions that can be privately done. So at the end of your deed restrictions, there may be a way how you can do an amendment to your deed restriction. It is a very tedious process generally. 75% or more signatures are needed or some sort of things. So it's a legal process, but it's outside City of Houston's purview. So, but there is a private process you could try to do to change the deed restrictions.
Lynn, you had started to ask, sorry, this is Eddie from the city. You had started to ask a question that was here about the process of just adding a modular pre-existing home to a property with no deed restrictions.
Savita, would you like to tackle that one?
I did not clearly understand the question. Eddie, can you please repeat?
Sure. Yeah, it says, what is to stop someone from buying or placing a modular home on property with no deed restrictions?
It cannot be mobile home, but if it is less than 900 square feet and it's going to be on a foundation, then yes, it could be placed. And it will require all the connections, utility connections, and those permits have to be received from the city.
Incidentally, this question makes me think of like people who purchase shipping containers and then convert them to living spaces, for instance.
Yes. A lot of actually other cities in United States are slowly allowing those to happen too.
I think that's a good, this is Hector Rodriguez, planning department. That's a good question for the following meeting with people from the Public Works and Engineering Department.
Thank you, Hector.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage, if there are any other questions, to please visit us on letstalkhouston.org/ADU and add those questions in our chat feature, which will be available by the morning. And we will make sure to add those to one of our next 2 workshops. I want to just encourage you all to come back to letstalkhouston.org/ADU to find the date and final arrangements for the next workshop. They will be at the end of September. We are confirming the speakers and the time and date, and we'll be able to post that by next week. This has been a great workshop. There have been wonderful questions from the community. I really appreciate the interaction from the guests and the visitors. Thank you. And I want to acknowledge our director, Margaret Wallace Brown, who's on the call, as well as our assistant director, Jennifer Oslin. And I want to give a very special welcome, well, a very special thank you to Cole Peterson for this presentation today. And I urge you all to check out one of his websites. There's lots of great information. And although some of the guidelines in terms of ordinances and our policies here may be different from Houston to Portland, but still the workshops that he has available are a great resource. And unless I hear or see anything else from any other staff, I'd like to thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you at the next workshop. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
for being
Lynn.
with us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cole. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.